Hi, my name is Nathalie Edmond, and thanks for tuning in on another installment of videos on deepening conversations around race. And I have a special guest today. And if you haven't tuned in to some of my other videos, I highly recommend White Supremacy and Privilege, as well as the history of racism in this country, the untold story. So today I'm joined by Chris Marietti, who's my spouse, and we just thought we would share some of our reflections about being on this journey of being an anti-racist, and some of the challenges we've had, some of the things we continue to struggle with, and we hope that it inspires you or validates or builds some curiosity about your own journey. So Chris, the way that we're going to do this is that I'm going to ask you a question, you'll answer, and then I will answer for myself, and then we'll keep going from there.
Great.
Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I guess first question is, when did you first start thinking about race?
I think that, like a lot of things, I think it was kind of a continuum. I grew up in what I would describe as a predominantly white, predominantly conservative neighborhood, where race didn't play a huge role in my life. I didn't think about it much, aside from the societal built-in fear of the other. So I had friends of color, not many Black friends at all, if any. But mostly white. So my parents did as good a job as they could, being white parents that weren't necessarily focused on race either. So there wasn't any place that I was being taught that there was diversity and how much it mattered, until I got to college. And when I got to college, all of a sudden the friends that I made, the people that I interacted with on a daily basis, changed dramatically from what had been almost exclusively white to people of every shade. And it was really eye-opening, especially when you get to college and you're having deep conversations with people and people opening up, and I got to listen to a lot of perspectives that I certainly had not been exposed to before. And if I had been exposed, I hadn't been a good listener about it. But that was an opening step. Eventually you and I started dating, and there was like a whole race issue there that I had to kind of come to grips with. Introducing a person of color as my significant other to family members, to other friends, and again, that was another step. We got married. There was more of that as you got to meet extended family, and we start to plan this life together. We had kids that are obviously biracial, and again, there's even more of it. And even then, even when I'm now an active parent to a child that is not white, I still, that still did not solidify in my mind like all there is to know about being in relation with people that are not white. So and all these years later, I'm still I'm still learning. So the whole thing is a journey. It's definitely one that I'm glad that I'm on, but I still wish that I'm more, farther along or was farther along earlier in my life than I am now, but you keep working.
Yeah, I think about, I can't remember a time I didn't think about race. Probably my first clear message or memory of race was I had lived overseas for a couple of years when I was really little with extended family, and then I came back to the United States for kindergarten. And I remember like going to kindergarten or preschool of some sort, and I really remember noticing that I looked different than other people, and that felt lonely. Like I felt other. I think that was my first experience of feeling other. And the elementary school I went to in Brooklyn was predominantly kids of color, predominantly Black kids. And I remember noticing the differences. And at that time, it was harder to get like dolls that were not white. And I remember having this Brooke Shields doll. Like it was basically her head, and she had like this amazing hair. And I had no idea at that time, I didn't have the language to describe like how that was probably negatively impacting my self-esteem. That I like as a kid, was playing with this doll that had texture of hair that I could never possibly have. And then I remember around age like 9, 4th grade, we moved to the suburbs of New Jersey, so to a predominantly white town, and again feeling other because they're probably in my in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, there were probably two of us Black girls in that entire 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade. And then I remember like different points of contrast. So I feel like that's been the story of my life, of like that sense of being one of the only Black people in the space. And then when I'm in spaces where it's primarily Black people, I think at this point I feel great ease. But when I was younger, probably in my teen years, I felt like I didn't quite fit. There was this phrase Oreo that people like to use, that you're Black on the outside but white on the inside. And for a long time I held that because of just growing up in predominantly white spaces. And so it would always take me a little while to adjust to being in predominantly Black spaces. Like once I relaxed into it, it was amazing. But there was that at beginning of like, will they think I'm really Black? Will I fit in? Will they like me? There was a lot of that. I don't have any of that anymore. So it's so interesting. I think we went to Rutgers for undergraduate, huge campus. And I think what was so startling to me was in terms of race, is that I had never really had South Asian friends. So I think for me, like race, it was like, to make some really great friends that are South Asian was like amazing to me. Like it was a whole new world. So it's so interesting what we get exposed to. So a lot of the discussions I've been having have been about white supremacy and white privilege and racism. And so, we could look up, the academic definition of what these things are, but I'm just wondering, like, what's your take on what this is? If you had to give like a short 1 to 2 minute, like, what is this?
I don't know if you got the right guy, if you want short. I think it's eminently important to get on the same page as far as language that you use, because I think that if you go in throwing around terms like racist and white supremacist, it tends to really throw people off who are used to, who have been raised thinking of these terms as like, you know, the guys in the hoods wearing, you know, burning crosses and waving flags and stuff. And and that's not how I define those. I guess I would, you know, I would define the overt racists as people would think of them as, I would label them bigots. But as far as racist and white supremacists, I use those labels to describe myself, because we live in this country, in this society that is built on racist ideals, where it puts white men like me, the people of tremendous privilege, at great advantage over everyone else. And I think that is, you know, the root of what white supremacy is. It is like white is supreme in how this system is set up. And if it is a racist and white supremacist system, then I, by reaping the benefits of it, would be defined as a racist and a white supremacist. So that, you know, I try and preface most of my commentary when I have these discussions with that in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you that I think it's this white supremacy to me definitely is a system where white is superior, and it's the foundation of the United States. And I think white supremacy, you know, has happened over many different countries in terms of like colonialism and things like that. And so I often think in white supremacy, whiteness is centered and valued, and that white privilege is the advantages that people who are white identifying or white looking or proximate to white, they get those advantages, right? So like I have a certain proximity to whiteness because I'm married to a white cis male, right? And our children, because they're of a lighter brown skin, have a certain privilege because they have that proximity to whiteness, right? Our son has what would be considered good hair. Our daughter has good hair, right? Which is all based on white supremacy, right? And thinking about how racism is something that we all learn, because it comes from, if white is supreme and centered, right? Anything that is not that is other. And so I think racism is the power to take your biased beliefs and enact them, right? So I could have racist thoughts, but I don't, as a Black woman in our society, I don't have a lot of power. I might have individual power, like I can do an act of harm to you, but I don't have systemic power. And I think that's sometimes what people get confused about, is they think, well, I as an individual don't, but if you step back and you look at the system, it's a little bit different. So I was thinking, as we were preparing for this talk and all the recent events, about how when we were at Rutgers, we started in Rutgers in the fall of 1994. And that's the year that we met. And I remember that first year, in the winter, there was, you followed men's basketball at Rutgers. And I remember that there were Black students who protested by doing a sit-in at a men's basketball game. And I'm thinking about how, you know, that was, you know, what, 26 years ago, if I'm doing my math correctly. And thinking about how, what was your reaction back then? And how does that differ from a couple of years ago when Colin Kaepernick took the knee at a football game, and just what's happening now in terms of people protesting the murder of George Floyd?
I recall that that protest. It was a game. I mean, boy, they picked a really good one to gain notoriety, because we were playing the @1 team in the nation, and we were actually leading at halftime, as I remember. And it was at halftime that they went out and they sat at center court and disrupted the game, and they had to finish it on another date. I was not at the game, but I remember the night that it happened, and people were coming back from the game, and mostly white people, and I remember them being upset about, you know, why this is happening. And I remember that it was a point at which I was saying like, you know, if they're doing this, they're not just doing it for fun. Like, there's really got to be something behind this. And it's, you know, I don't think that I was in a mode where I would call myself super open to a lot of things yet. I was still really early in my progression, but I remember having the thought that like this is something to like listen to at this point. Like, I think that was the big draw that I took from that.
Do you remember why they did the sit-in?
If I remember correctly, it was because the president at the time, Francis Lawrence, had commented about standardized testing being geared to help white people succeed, but I don't think that he you know, I would have to go back and see what it was that he said, because I would agree with him on that point, but I imagine that he must have said something to the effect of like, people of color are not suited to, you know, like, put it on them instead of on the white institution that's driving all of this. Yeah, so you know, as I said, I think it had to be pretty big for them to choose that spot to disrupt things, and it, you know, it was effective. It was a big to do at the time. So fast forwarding to years later, when Kaepernick was taking the knee, by then I would say that I was obviously much further along, and I totally understood why he was doing it, and was supportive of him doing it. I had conversations with people who were not of the same frame of mind as me, where, you know, I backed him up. But at the time, I would also say that I probably had one or two conversations with people where I didn't step forward and voice my opinion. So I think it would be different now, even these couple of years later.
And you chose to basically boycott the NFL the following year after I sent you this request from Black ministers to kind of support this movement.
Yes, it was a group of Black ministers who was asking for a boycott for the year, for that one season, to show what an impact would be. So I don't think that it took that much for me to say yeah to doing that. But I didn't see myself as losing all that much in the deal. Did it make things a little bit weird sometimes when friends were watching it or talking about stuff that happened over the weekend, stuff that I normally would have been paying attention to? Yeah, but I was hoping that it would draw attention to the fact that like that maybe others would see me and say like, well, if he's doing that, like, he doesn't tend to skip out on a whole year of the NFL lightly. So what's behind that? Even a couple of years later from that, I think that I would probably approach it differently today and be more vocal about my the driving force behind that than I did back then.
Right. I'm thinking back to college, and I remember being disconnected from that sit-in. Like, I had an awareness that it was happening, but it wasn't like, that wasn't who I was. It wasn't, something that I did. And fast forward a couple decades later to Colin Kaepernick and like just feeling really impressed by what he was doing, like just thinking about like using your privilege, right, as an NFL star, you have this platform to make a statement, to get, because what I found is that he got people talking, like at great cost to his professional career, he got people talking. I mean, people tend to get polarized, so I don't know how deep the conversations go. It's interesting lately to see, you know, as people are having difficulties with some of the rioting and protesting that have turned violent in some ways, you know, that, you know, just thinking about the ways that Colin Kaepernick was vilified for his peaceful protests, right? That it doesn't matter if you're peacefully protesting or violently protesting, it takes away from the message of like what's actually happening, which is that that white supremacy feeds anti-Blackness. And so that means that Black people and Black bodies are not safe. And so thinking about your comment about like you would speak up more if it was today, and so just wondering what makes it hard to speak up at times.
I would say it's systemic. I am used to having all these advantages, and I think that there's a reluctance to put that on the line sometimes, whether it's being safe in your job, if you were to say the wrong thing, you know, safe among your friends. You don't want to, you don't want to say the wrong thing and potentially put a friend off or something. But I think that I've come around on those kind of things, and I think it helps to be in positions where my friends and my job are more or less aligned with the way I think. I think having had more practice at having these dialogues has given me more confidence to be able to speak more freely about this. One of the things is that a great fear is not thinking that you have the right things to say, or thinking that you're gonna, ruin the message by putting your foot in your mouth. I put my foot in my mouth regularly, and it's just something, we're all human. We're all like, nobody's gonna say the right thing every single time, with one or two exceptions, but I'm not one of them. And I think the key is to keep getting that message out there as much as you can, and keep putting one foot in front of the other.
It's interesting, like I think about, I spent majority of my life not speaking up about racial stuff. So I remember when I was pregnant with our soon-to-be 13-year-old, I remember all of a sudden I had this like wave of panic, and it was like, what, I don't even remember what activated. Maybe it was just pregnancy stuff, and I was thinking like, what kind of world are we bringing our child into, and like, are we surrounded by people who even understand that race is a thing? Because I think part of white privilege is that you don't have to acknowledge that race is a thing, like you don't have to look at it. And so I remember like organizing these like get-togethers and like, let's watch Color of Fear and some other movies, let's talk about this stuff. And I was just so disappointed with like the lack of response. I mean, I was pleased by the people who did participate. And then I feel like I really spent the last several years, there's something about entering my 40s which felt like liberating, But I mean, I felt like as a professional, as a psychologist, and as an administrator in a hospital system, I did not use my platform, my privilege to talk about those things in like certain forums. Like, you know, I would have staff members or supervisees, and we would talk about it there, but I didn't, and I was very aware that I was the only Black person, oftentimes the only person of color in managerial spaces. And so there's something about strength in numbers, right? And when you are the only person of color and you are the only Black person in like a sea of white people, and the people who have the power are white, cis, heterosexual men, right? That there is a threat that I didn't even consciously think about it. I just knew it wasn't safe to do that. And it's interesting, like the last year I was there, I was much more outspoken in general. And my life was really, really hard. Like it was really, really hard there. And then, I mean, I think there's something about age and like a certain kind of professional status and raising biracial children. And I remember when our son was turning 9, and I had been like, which was around the time of the Black Lives Matter movement starting, and like just this recognition that something around age 9, which makes Black boys appear threatening, that they start to, instead of being cute, they start to be viewed as threats. And thinking about the school to prison pipeline, and we had to have the talk with him about what he could and couldn't do in public, and just how heart-wrenching it is to see him wrestle with like just what it's like to be, a brown body in this world. So I guess that leads to my next question about what, if any, worries do you have about raising biracial children?
As a parent, you worry every day. I have, my concerns are on a couple of different levels. One is that no matter what I do, there's always going to be a disconnect between him and myself. I mean, both kids and myself. But if we're talking about our son, that I will never be able to fully understand what it's like to be him and go through a day in his shoes, and that knowing that even if we put him in the best situation that we can possibly do for him, that he still wouldn't have his way through the world be like the way that I moved through the world, the kind of safety that I had been given. I think that's the biggest part. You always have concerns about his safety. You hope that the world is coming along in a way that you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. By living in a better neighborhood or whatever.
Which is code language for white, right?
For being in a whiter neighborhood. You never know. It's, I'm terrified more every year that he gets older and closer to being a brown body that is out in the world without us to be there, without being able to wield my privilege to protect him. Yeah, it's a bit terrifying.
I think I worry that his spirit will be broken. I think that's, maybe it's the psychologist in me, but like that when I think Black people have to make themselves smaller in some way in order to stay safe. Like he's just a really sensitive kid, and he's so talented, and yet I can see the ways in which all the stuff he must hold during the day, and then you see all the emotion at night. And just thinking, like, I so hope, you know, if he chooses one day to go to college, that he goes to a, you know, predominantly Black college, like, because I think he needs to see those people, like, when he's in spaces in which, like, he's not the minority, he thrives. And so I worry about, like, the cost, like the emotional cost of, like, better academics. And this, you know, just something that weighs on my mind is, like, always wondering if we're making the right choices for them, because it's just hard and we don't know. Yeah, so I think being intentional about making sure that he can see characters and people and books and restaurants, and, like, just so that he can expose that, so he can see that there's other worlds out there, and that Black people are able to do incredible things. So in our last few minutes together, I know that the last several years we've been part of a book club, either at our church or our own book club that I started a couple of years ago. We read a lot of different books, and we've seen a lot of different movies, documentaries and things. And so just wondering if you were to list a couple of them that have really helped you in developing your anti-racist identity, what would you pick? What would you recommend to people?
I tend to start with Waking Up White. I think that was the first one that I did, and I thought that was such a great introduction to really exactly that, waking up to what it is to be white. You know, it's written by a white person, so you're kind of working through things the way that she did. So for white people, I think that it's a great introduction to being on this journey. White Fragility, and forgive me, I know you know the authors. They don't come to mind.
Debbie Irving is Waking Up White, and Robin DiAngelo is White Fragility.
Thank you. White Fragility was another good one. It kind of takes it to that next step to say like, yeah, all right, you're on this journey, but here's the ways that if you're acting the way that you've always acted, like this is what's getting in your way. And how you're, you know, not being as helpful as you want to be. And I remember a book. This one was written by a white man called White Like Me.
Tim Wise.
Tim Wise, thank you. I remember there was a lot from that book that stuck with me. Evidently not enough that I can give you concrete details of what it was, but I just remember for a long time, like, having that hang with me.
What I liked, there's a video of him talking about how when he went to college, like, he didn't have enough money to pay for it, and his mother didn't have enough money to pay for it, but that she was able to go to a bank and get a loan. And the way he describes it, right, is even though his mom didn't have a lot of money, was that because of his history of whiteness and generations of whiteness, and he like does it dramatically. So he says, and their parent and my grandfather and blah, 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 that they were able to acquire a loan. And so like, I think he did a really nice job of talking about how when you've had privilege for generations, you build wealth, even if you physically don't have the money, you have this other access that other people don't have. And that was powerful, the way that he did that.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate a lot of that book. But I also want to point out that like I've spent the bulk of my time talking about white authors. And there are so many great books written by authors of color, and that really make you see things from their perspective. And I think that's imperative for white people to be able to see from outside of their own perspective, to listen to the words of others. So I mean, I think of Ta-Nehisi Coates, James Baldwin. There's and again, you would probably have a lot more names that to come to mind than the ones that I'm rattling off. The couple that I'm rattling off. There are many more. But I think that it's incumbent upon us as white people to educate ourselves, and these are great resources to be able to do that. So I can't, I can't say enough that it's really important to go out and digest this information that's out there.
What I appreciate is, because we have this book club that meets every 2 months, is over the last several years, we've been able to read so many different books and have like these ongoing conversations. So, oh my God, it's so hard to limit the list. So yeah, all that you said is good. I would probably add When They Call You a Terrorist, the Black Lives Matter memoir. I mean, that was incredibly powerful to look at the intersection of race and mental illness, and just the way people are policed and targeted. I really enjoyed Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, which talks about mass incarceration, and the Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th, because for me, it was really helpful to understand the history of racism in this country and the way that it's embedded in our laws. And if you don't do the history, if you don't learn history, then you think it's individual people making choices versus a system that's set up to kind of, push people into certain things. Just Mercy, also another really great book about like just the legal system. I mean, that is a huge thing. Evicted, which was about like just housing and the ways in which people get evicted. And once you're on the path, it's so hard to catch up. And all the different reasons why people end up homeless or just, living from paycheck to paycheck. Yeah, there's so many, Eloquent Rage, that was good. Good and Mad was a really good book because it talked about the feminist movement and the ways in which white women didn't support Black women. Yeah, there's just so many books out there. Check out my website, mmcounselingcenter.com, which lists basically all the books we've read. And I hope that you will continue on this journey with us. Thank you so much, Chris, for spending some time.
Anytime. Glad to have the opportunity.
Yeah, and I hope that wherever you are on this journey, right, that you find support, because we cannot do this work alone. To find people to continue to have these dialogues with, and feel free to reach out and comment and let me know what you're thinking. And until we meet again, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace.